Hey everyone, Seth at Hub City Vintage, and welcome back for part 2 of our Citizen Challenge Diver and Seiko Turtle series. In the last video, we shared a bit of the history of Citizen's 520110 and made some pretty comprehensive visual comparisons between it and the Seiko 6309 7040. Both fall within the 150 meter pro diver category and were released within about a year of each other. And in this video, I thought we'd take a closer look at the movement. I'll give you some specs to round out our comparison. And since we ran so long last time, I'll try to keep this one a bit shorter, but certainly want to be sure to cover all the basics. As I mentioned in the previous video, I think these two watches are pretty great for a head-to-head look because they're both Japanese built and from the same era, and by companies who both utilized vertically integrated manufacturing. That just means that all the components were made and assembled in-house at that time. And lastly, they would have been marketed to the same consumer as direct competing pieces. Is one better than the other? I think I'll leave that for you to decide. I'm going to sing the praises of both, and that's in spite of my clearly vocal bias for the Seiko Turtle. I can't help that it's the watch I like the most. If we just start by taking a look at what we see, you'll notice right away that the Seiko Rotor is a wedge shape, a little bit smaller than the Citizen's full half pie piece rotor here. And as I told you in the last video, Seiko's auto winding system is modular. It is stacked right on top of the movement. If a part fails here, this entire assembly for the auto wind mechanism can be removed and one or all parts can be replaced, whereas Citizen has utilized more of an integrated design. You'll notice here the only jewel that we can really see on Seiko's auto wind assembly here is this one for the transmission wheel, whereas on the Citizen we can see all of the pivots for the going train and the reduction wheel. So there really is no assembly here other than it's all basically one piece, much more streamlined, using fewer pieces. I will say as a technician it's easier to work on the Seiko because if a part fails of a pawl lever, or Seiko sometimes referred to as a magic lever, if some part fails here, it's easy to just remove the auto wind system, replace the worn or broken part, and put that back on, never having to touch the rest of the movement. Whereas with the Citizen, this entire upper barrel bridge here also contains all of the components for the auto wind. So, it's a little more troublesome to repair if there's an issue, but I always think that fewer parts means, more streamlined and less to go wrong. So whichever of that makes one or the other better, I don't know if there's an edge either way. Now the Seiko, their magic lever is magic in the sense that it can be wound bidirectionally. This works in either direction. This pawl lever is going to grab that transmission wheel and either push or pull in either direction. Giving this transmission wheel here route to the ratchet wheel and can wind it pretty efficiently. Any movement that you make is going to be converted into potential energy, loading the mainspring. On the Citizen, we have unidirectional winding via a reduction wheel under here that meets an intermediate here. Let's see if we can keep that rotor out of the way. It meets this intermediate wheel, which then interlocks with the ratchet wheel here. So only get winding from this way, and the other way is sort of a neutral spin of that reduction wheel. But we also get the benefit of manual winding on this watch, which is a huge benefit. And if you're a Seiko fan, you'll know that part of your morning is always spent giving your Seiko a good shake and getting it going, loading that mainspring. But we have a crown wheel here that you can see and a slipping intermediate wheel here. I'll show you what I mean. If we move our crown backwards, you'll see that wheel sort of come out of position. And as we turn the crown and the crown wheel, as a result, then it grabs that intermediate wheel and slides it into interlocking with the ratchet wheel, giving the mainspring power that way. I am a huge fan of manual winding. Obviously, I don't see it very often. There are several Seiko movements that utilize manual winding, but for the majority of what I work on, which is a lot of 61 movements, we don't see that. So it's nice to have that manual winding feature. I'll certainly give that an edge to the Citizen movement. You can see all metal parts throughout, not a lot of plastic here. There's a couple of smaller plastic components on the date side of the Seiko, and I will perhaps let you know if I run into any on the Citizen side. From memory, I can't remember if the 8210 has any plastic components on the calendar side. But very well built movements, lots of great parts here. And you'll notice that the only plastic you do see is here in this movement spacing ring, which I am always going to prefer metal. I love Seiko's movement spacing ring here. It has a spring along the outside, which once you tighten down the case back, really does a great job of holding everything exactly where it needs to be. Whereas here, we can only rely on this plastic, which always and forever, with age, will become brittle, run the risk of breaking when you remove it to service these watches, especially after several decades. And this is nice and thick here. I doubt we'll have much issue with that, but I'll always prefer separate and metal parts, even for things as simple as a movement spacing ring. So measurements, they're really pretty close. The 6309 is a 27 millimeter diameter by 5.35 millimeter height, and the Citizen is a 25.6, so within a millimeter and a half roughly, and it's a 5.2 millimeter. They're really very close in size, even though the Seiko just appears larger due to that movement retaining ring there. It fills that space up and makes it look a little larger, but they're very close in size. I think the Seiko mainspring is maybe a bit larger. The average power reserve is going to be between 45 and 47 hours. And that's as it's listed in brand new condition. Obviously, mainsprings are going to lose some of their efficiency over time. And the 8210, I've read a couple of different things, but I'm going to give it an average power reserve of about 43 hours. So really not a huge difference there. And if it's something you're going to wear all the time, then it's going to be self-winding. And really that's not a huge consideration unless you have multiple watches that you change out of all the time. Both run at a beat rate of 21.6. That's 21,600 beats per hour, so they're very similar in their operation, and they were both very long produced movements. Seiko started the 6309 off the production line in '76 and ran all the way through 1988. Citizen's 8210 also for a very long time was in production. In fact, the 8200 is still a Miyota base. The 821A, I think, is probably the closest to this movement, still in production. You can still buy that movement along with the 8215, which is, I think, a little bit of a bit nicer finish on the 8200 movements. But yeah, these are kind of the Honda Accord of these brands. They were movements that they just put into production, really just refined and made very efficient, very reliable. Both of these movements, I would say, probably for the foreseeable future, you'll be able to find parts for them and keep them running if you maintain good service practices. There's no reason these watches shouldn't be able to last you a lifetime. So great watches as far as reliability, both workhorse movements, both practically bulletproof. They're going to run. Neither of these watches has been serviced. They are in as found condition, and both are, even currently, they're running. I don't know about the timekeeping. I can throw them on the time grapher and see. Certainly, I'm sure that they're not going to be running very well, but they are running, which should be noted. Now, if you're wondering, neither of these watches have hacking lever or second setting, and that's really, I think, a feature that would be great for a dive watch. It's really more of a military application, but I always like having second setting if it's an option. And, that's kind of used more, I said it's a military application that allows you to set two or more watches to the exact same time, synchronizing the time. If you are in some sort of military event with one or more other people, then you can set your watches to the exact same time, and everyone is, provided the watches are working correctly, everyone is operating on the same time down to the second, which can be very important in military maneuvers. But also if you're curious about how well your watch is keeping time, you can certainly use second setting for that as well to see how well it's operating against a quartz watch or a clock or your cell phone. But again, neither of those have that here, although I am going to speak a little bit about another movement in a Patreon exclusive, and if you'd like to hear more about that, maybe how you can get a turtle with second setting, well, you'll have to come join us over at Patreon. So shameless plug, but it'll be worth it for that little bit of extra content if you're curious. So as we wrap up, I can't say enough good things about either of these watches, and really the added benefits of the Citizen's manual winding, but versus the efficiency of Seiko's auto winding. You know, again, it's difficult to say whether one is better than the other. And as we said, you know, they both are phenomenal looking watches. The specs are quite similar, and I am always going to be more than happy to be on board with any watch that builds all of their own products, all of their own parts, and assembles them. There's nothing like in-house, and it's such a rare thing to see today. So many watches are built with, I don't even have to tell you whose movements. I'm sure you can figure it out very quickly with a very small amount of research. But most watches they only differ in the appearance, and I think there's something to be said for watch companies actually building watch movements and you know, taking the tolerances and the specifications of their watches seriously, and being concerned enough with that they would like to have control of everything. That's important, and it certainly makes a difference for whether you are, especially if you want to work on watches, or that you would like to have, you know, parts interchangeability, that kind of thing. In-house watches, in-house movements, that's just the way to go. But either way, if you are a fan of Seiko, you should just almost by default be a fan of Citizen. They are the other great Japanese producer, and there are lots of watches. Almost every time Seiko would release a model, Citizen would come on their heels to say, yep, we can do that too, and maybe we'll even add a couple things to make it better, or at least different. But either way, if you are looking for a vintage 150 meter diver, the Seiko Turtle is obviously, you cannot go wrong, but a strong contender should be the Citizen Challenge Diver. And I will tell you, this is a much harder watch to find, especially in this kind of condition, but well worth the wait to get a great example. So if you have any questions, please feel free to comment below. If you disagree with something I've said, or if you have a preference one way or the other, let me hear your thoughts on Citizen, on Seiko, on these two divers, on a different watch. Let me know. I'd be curious to hear. You can do that below. Please subscribe, like. As I said, join us over at Patreon, where $7 a month gets you access to exclusive content, sneak peeks at all of our upcoming inventory, and we even do the occasional giveaway, which is also a lot of fun. Either way, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.